Welcome to everybody. It's great to see so many of you, or hear so many of you on this webinar, and shows the level of sort of interest and enthusiasm we've got for this subject. So I think I'll start by just sort of going through that we announced a new approach to driving transformation and innovation, including plans to establish a £200 million innovation fund last December. But those are under very different circumstances to those that we face today. But I would say that I think the recent crisis has only served to reinforce the need for us to work together as a sector to address future challenges. And I would like to pay tribute to the men and women of the water sector, both in the companies and the supply chains, all the ancillary services that were there that have worked incredibly hard in extremely difficult circumstances through the COVID-19 crisis to keep customers supplied with water and sewerage services. And but I do think when you look at what's happened over the COVID-19 crisis, it does show how innovation has played an extremely important part in the response to that, with companies having to look at how they work remotely, how they do things differently in much more challenging circumstances. Could I just ask someone to go on mute, please? I'm getting a little bit of background chatter. Thank you. And I think that really that means that it shows again that innovation really needs to be at the heart of what the sector thinks about, and why also we're still moving ahead with this work now. And I would really like to sort of pay tribute as well to the work the sector's been doing in terms of thinking about innovation and the level of enthusiasm we've still seen from companies and from the sector in engaging with us on this. I'm really pleased to see so many of you here today to discuss our plans, and hope this is, though we are in this sort of remote circumstances, just to get a chance to ask questions and interact with us. So we believe that the adoption of innovative approaches in the water sector is really key to delivering long-term resilience and great customer service at an affordable price. The innovation funding we are introducing is central to delivering our new strategy and achieving our vision for the sector. The sector faces unprecedented pressures, both now in terms of COVID-19 and over the longer term in terms of climate change and population growth and demographic change. It will need to step up to make sure it can continue to deliver reliable, resilient and safe water that is affordable for all, while protecting and enhancing our natural environment and demonstrating greater public value. We also want to see companies work more effectively together and with their supply chain to better tackle these challenges. These are challenges that require intense collaboration across the sector, and it's really important that what we encourage in terms of innovation is a collaborative effort across the sector with supply chain and companies. We're pleased to see that the sector's already come together as well to develop the first sector-wide innovation strategy to drive this change. And we're really pleased that Ofwat has picked up this baton and is running with it in terms of developing that. And that's an incredibly important part of this, to make sure that the fund, the competition, and everything to do with innovation is really focused and the sector is strongly behind it. So moving on to the next slide. Our innovation fund is designed to go further than incremental improvements by driving and addressing the key strategic challenges that we believe the sector faces. It complements our PR19 framework and aims to focus efforts on the longer term. And we've identified a number of key themes and issues that we will target the innovation funding at. These are in line with Ofwat's wider strategy and include how we respond and adapt to climate change, including how to meet the sector's ambition on net zero emissions, how to restore and improve the ecological status of our water environments, understanding long-term operational resilience challenges and infrastructure risks to customers and the environment, and finding solutions to mitigate these in sustainable and efficient ways, testing new ways of conducting core activity to deliver wider public value, and I think really importantly, exploring the opportunities associated with open data. This has been a really key issue for us in terms of how the sector shares information on performance, on how it really shares best practice, but also in recent weeks and months with COVID-19, it's been a key thing in terms of companies managing operational challenges, particularly with the dry weather and the increased demand that we've seen with so many people at home on water networks. And also in terms of really trying to share information when identifying vulnerable customers. Still quite a long way to go, and we think innovation plays a really important role there. So these are some of the areas we really want to focus on, though we are keen to hear from people about what they see as some of those challenges. Do they resonate? Of course, there'll be opportunity within these broader themes to identify more specific issues, and in particular through the sector's innovation strategy, which my colleague Jonathan will touch on briefly later. So that gives you a bit of an overview of where we see things and what we want to try and achieve here. I'm now going to hand over to my colleague Rachel Wright, who will take you through our proposals for the innovation funding and competition.
Thank you, John. Good morning, everybody, and I hope you can hear me okay. My name is Rachel Wright, and I have recently joined the team to lead on the policy areas of the Innovation Fund. Just on the slide 5, our innovation consultation proposals, I'm hoping this is a diagram that you are fairly familiar with. We published our latest consultation on the 13th of May, and I just want to remind you all that the response deadline is the 24th of June, which is 2 weeks today. The diagram shown on the slide here is from that consultation document, and it summarises all the different parts and the interactions between them. And I'm going to talk through some of these now, and my colleague Mark will pick up on some other areas afterwards. So I'll start with some of the key policy areas we are grappling with. Moving to the next slide. I just want to remind you that the consultation is really an opportunity for water
I think we have a connection issue with Rachel, so apologies for that. So what I'll do is I'll take it from here, and hopefully Rachel can rejoin. So we're on slide 6, and what I wanted to do is to remind that the consultation is an opportunity for stakeholders to shape and input on some of the key outstanding policy issues. 3 in particular I wanted to draw attention to. So the first is intellectual property rights. So we recognise, of course, that having the right arrangements in place is key to encouraging that participation in the innovation competition. But at the same time, we have to balance this with ensuring that customers remain protected and get to see the benefits of the investment that they are making through their bills by funding the innovation competition. And so we therefore proposed default arrangements in the consultation, and we're keen to get your views on whether you think these arrangements strike the right balance and why, and any potential alternative arrangements that we might be considering. The second area is risk sharing. So we want to make sure that projects put forward for the innovation funding are of not only just high quality, but really that they also have the buy-in of water companies and their shareholders. We have to balance this out against ensuring that we don't discourage smaller water companies to participate. And here again, we've set out a proposal in the consultation for default arrangements. And we want to hear your views on how best appropriately to share risks between customers and water companies. Collaboration and partnerships is a third policy area of note. Now, the water companies will have the direct access to the innovation funding, but we have made it very, very clear that we want to see collaboration and partnerships between water companies and beyond, not only into the supply chain, beyond that, the conventional supply chain, but beyond that as well. Now, in this sense, the innovation funding is therefore not simply for water companies, but it is for all. And it's vital to successfully attract new ideas and solutions into the sector. Now, at this stage, we've chosen to route the funding through the water companies, really with the idea that we want to ensure those customers who will be funding the innovation will ultimately see the benefits. So there's that connection between funding and customer and customer need. And with that in mind, we're actively looking for ways to encourage partnerships with innovators, including with innovators not currently active in the sector. So moving on to slide 7, the 3 strands of activity. Now in the consultation, we have proposed 3 elements of next steps as to how this would be taken forward. So that's to say the main competition, an innovation in water challenge, and some enabling activities. I'll talk through the first 2, and Mark will talk in a little bit more detail about the enabling activities. Now in the consultation, we're proposing to start all 3 of these in the pilot year. Now an alternative would be that we could focus the pilot year on the innovation in water challenge and the enabling activities. And we'd welcome your views on this in terms of those 3 simultaneously or some phasing. So taking each of those. So the main competition. So this gives the water companies the opportunity to put forward bids for larger projects to be directly funded through the competition. And we do expect companies to be putting forward bids which involve partnerships and collaborations between companies, as well as with other stakeholders in the water sector and beyond, given the sort of golden thread of collaboration in this innovation endeavour. So that's the main competition. The second strand would be an innovation in water challenge. And in our consultation, we set out an approach to enable and encourage that third-party supply chain participation through this strand in particular. Now we know that there's a need for increased collaboration. People have been saying this for some time, and that will hold some of the keys to transformational innovation. This strand is where we see others from outside the sector and across the supply chain getting involved, although that shouldn't distract from collaboration in the main competition. Our proposal for the Innovation in Water Challenge is only one of the ways which this can be achieved, and should be the result of a bit of a step change in the relationships between the companies and the supply chain, a step change in the depth, breadth, and frequency of those collaborations. Now, under this approach, the water companies would identify specific key challenges as part of their work on the joint innovation strategy. And they would invite proposals from the sector and beyond to address those challenges. Now, of course, these challenges would need to be aligned with the key themes for the innovation consultation: climate change, ecological status of water, long-term operational resilience, public value, and open data. Put simply, we want companies to come forward with the problems that they are looking for solutions to, and invite the supply chain and third parties in to the space to come up with some of the solutions. The water companies would need to identify a number of proposals that they wished to sponsor for participation in the competition, and we would then expect the independent expert panel to recommend projects for funding. In terms of practicalities, we haven't set out too much about how this will happen in practice, as we recognise the importance of this being owned and driven by the sector, but we welcome ideas on how to take this challenge forward, whether it's through Slido today or through the consultation responses for the 24th of June. Finally, on to the enabling activities. So that's the third element of what we did envisage during the pilot year. So the development of an innovation strategy might highlight the need for the sector to undertake new activities to better enable innovation. And these sector-wide enabling activities could be partly funded through the competition. For example, proposals designed to improve the coordination of innovation activities, and facilitate rollout through a centre of excellence, or proposals looking at implementing open data are examples of enabling activities that would go beyond specific projects. Now, proposals of this nature, so in terms of the enabling nature, these would still need to be scrutinised and follow a similar process to bids from the main competition, the Innovation in Water Challenge. So the bar is the same to ensure that they represent value for customers. And I would imagine that the sector strategy, the joint innovation strategy, may help to identify and inform areas that would benefit from greater collaboration and external insight and ideas. So in summary then, there is collaboration in all three elements, and we really want to make sure that how this evolves invites and includes partnerships beyond the sector, and really that's the motivation behind the Innovation in Water Challenge. I'll pass over to Mark, who will pick up then, subject to the consultation feedback that we get, what we would see the journey over the coming months in terms of the next steps.
Thanks, Jonathan, and good morning to everyone who's online. As said, my name is Mark Hannis. I'm a principal in the policy team, and I'm going to say a few words about implementation and next steps. But before that, can I just remind you about Slido? You can pose your questions throughout the presentation, so please do that. We'll flash up the details again in a moment as to how to do that, but if you type in Slido into Google, you will find that very easily, and use the hashtag Ofwat Innovation, and you'll be away. So there's a Q&A section and a live poll section, so please do look at that. Okay, we've just talked about the three strands of the competition: the Innovation in Water Challenge, the main competition, and the enabling activities element. And this next slide broadly shows our plans for the next 6 months or so in terms of getting ourselves in position to kick off each of the strands, and when we might expect projects to start coming through and potentially begin. Now, the timetable is predicated on a number of things, not least relative stability in terms of COVID and our own resources, but also that we can partner with a supporting organisation fairly smoothly, more of which in a moment. As such, the timetable does assume that we won't face too many hiccups along the way, but it's worth noting that it could be subject to slight delays. With your support and cooperation, though, we will do our best to meet this timetable. Our aim is to kick off the first round of each of the three strands of the innovation funding in the winter. We will reach a final decision on this following our consultation, and we're keen to hear your views on the feasibility of running all three strands, or whether we should look to prioritise one strand or another, in particular this first year. And we've added a question very specifically on this in the live poll area of Slido, so please do take a look at that. And also, please provide your views and thoughts on this in your formal consultation response. Moving on to the next slide, we are looking to appoint an organisation to support us in administering the innovation funding and delivering the innovation competition. Now, this will involve both ensuring that the final process reflects our final policy aims and playing a proactive role in the administration of the three strands of innovation funding. Working with this organisation, we will also be seeking to establish an independent panel of experts to provide advice and make recommendations for funding to Ofwat. We are planning to tender out for this support in the summer. This will be an open and transparent tender process, which will help ensure that we appoint the best possible candidate for the job at a cost that represents value for consumers. And it's probably worth reinforcing the point that we're really mindful that this is customer money, and we'll be carefully considering how we ensure that money is put to the best use in all aspects of the competition, but particularly in terms of administering the fund and delivering the competition. As highlighted in our consultation document, we'll be looking to appoint an independent and impartial organisation with experience of running similar processes, who will also be able to demonstrate expertise in administering innovation mechanisms in other sectors and or in other jurisdictions. So we're in the process of putting that tender together now, and we're aiming for this to go live in late July, early August. So a quick recap on those bits then. Our aim is to kick off the first round of each of the 3 strands of the innovation funding in the winter, but that decision is subject to views, and the timing will depend on our ability to smoothly contract with a supporting partner to help us deliver the competition. And we're hoping and planning to tender out for this support in late July and early August. Okay, moving on to the next slide, slide 10. We also wanted to talk to you about developing a one-stop shop to complement the other innovation activities we are doing. Again, you may have read about this in the consultation document and seen our commitment to trialling this concept in our new strategy. We see the one-stop shop as having 2 core functions. Firstly, to provide regulatory advice to innovators trying to get new ideas off the ground in the water and wastewater sector and looking to understand what our rules and regulations might mean for them. And second, to work with other regulators to explore regulatory challenges to innovation in the sector, which we then hope will help to inform the development of a future regulatory framework which will continue to encourage and enable innovation. We've prepared some questions we'd like to ask you on this. And again, they can be found in the live poll area in Slido, so please do take a look and offer your views. All the details you need to participate are on the screen, along with a sense of the questions that we are posing. So I hope that's clear. I'll now hand back to Jonathan to provide some concluding remarks.
Thanks, Mark. I think what I wanted to just sort of draw this part of the webinar to a close on was really homing in on the role of the sector leadership in terms of the joint innovation strategy. I guess the first thing I guess I wanted to share is that this joint innovation strategy is broader and is more than simply the document that provides context for the £200 million that we're talking about in terms of the fund. I think whatever role we play in this sector, I think there is general consensus that while a fund could potentially provide a welcome stimulus on its own, the fund will not be able to address, and nor should it seek to address, all of the opportunities that are out there. The fund is just one element of a broader suite of innovative activity and incentives and opportunities, both within companies, through the supply chain, with established universities and hubs, and new startup clusters and communities of interest. We're really clear that this has to fit within a broader ecosystem. So how can the sector best harness that breadth, that power, those range of opportunities and those range of delivery mechanisms to guide innovation in addressing and pivoting towards those big long-term challenges that are frankly shared in common and maybe beyond the reach of any one individual or company or group of individuals to succeed in finding the solutions to. And how can the sector guide that work in a way that achieves faster, less duplicative, more open solutions that will underpin those long-term outcomes that we all strive for in terms of delivering service to customers and the environment? How can the sector orientate itself towards those transformational changes that are needed over the long term, but obviously while also dealing with the issues of the moment? So these are big and tricky questions. And I'm really pleased that the water sector across the UK is coming together to grapple with them and to shape a joint innovation strategy under the auspices and coordination of Ofwat, and to do that in a way that paves the way for greater supply chain collaboration within that space as crucial partners in that innovation ecosystem. I think we've sent a clear signal in our previous communications and consultations on this, but I think it's worth underlining that the sector strategy, the joint innovation strategy, should seek ways to rethink the sector's innovation architecture how all these different pieces fit together. And I think it should also identify concrete steps to enable new ideas, both from within and outside the sector, and concrete steps for that to come to fruition. I think that there is a general understanding that that needs to happen, and I think the next stage will be the stepping stones to making that a reality. And I guess also a good strategy is always an opportunity for a bit of reflection on strengths and weaknesses, and to take steps to address these. For sure, this will be a strategy that is not a one-off. It will not be done and sit on a shelf, but it will need to live and it will need to evolve. And so that will be an important touchstone for the work of the sector on innovation, but also a touchstone for the fund going forward. And of course, the strategy will have to confront making difficult choices, choices about focus, choices about priority. But in how it does that, it will obviously need to ensure that shareholders, customers, and taxpayers' money is spent widely in that ecosystem, and that we use as a sector the full range of funding vehicles for the right kinds of opportunity. And I know this is work in progress, but I'm confident and pleased that the Acquia team will be, with the companies, will be reaching out to the broader sector stakeholders over the coming weeks. So it's about 10:30. What I suggest we now do is to move into the more interactive part of the webinar. So if you remember, we've got the facility to ask questions through www.sli.do. There's two tabs in there. There's the poll around the one-stop shop and some other questions within that space. I'd like to just give you a couple of minutes to look at that tab first before we then start to pick up some of the questions that have been coming in on the through the interactive Q&A portal. So I'll go silent for a couple of minutes and restart in probably about 10:34, 10:35.
Okay, great. Hi, everybody. My name is Clotilde. I hope you can hear me okay, and I'll be moderating the Q&A session, so please get your questions in. I'm having some issues with Slido and making some of the questions live. Apologies for that, but we will be making all of the materials available to everybody, including slides, questions, and answers to any questions we're not able to address today because of time later on. So, Jonathan, I think we're going to start up with a first question around the process for making decisions for funding and the role of the expert panel. And there's some interest out there around how we are going to appoint that expert panel.
Thanks, Phil. So in terms of how decisions are made, the proposals would come forward. They would be assessed through transparent assessment process by an independent panel, and that panel would make a set of recommendations for funding. Now, ultimate strategic control rests with Ofwat, but we are seeking to appoint an independent entity to advise on the range of projects received and to undertake that initial evaluation. In terms of how that panel would be appointed, we, as Mark mentioned, we will be seeking to appoint an independent entity who would support Ofwat in the running of the fund, and as one of the tasks that we would work with the entity to do is to appoint a panel of experts. But obviously, we are very cognizant of the fact that that has to be a broad and representative and expert panel, and therefore that would be a very important stage of the setup.
Thanks, Jonathan. Rachel, we've also had a question around the different strands of the competition and whether or not we've reached a decision on how the funding would be split between the three strands. Now, as I understand, that's still very much up for debate in the consultation, but is there anything you wanted to add on that one?
Yes, thank you, and I hope my signal holds out for this one. Really interesting question, and one that we're grappling with. Each of the three strands brings important aspects to the fund, and how we allocate those funds between the three strands is going to be really critical to the success of the overall funding. But in part, this rests on how we introduce the three different strands, and as we set out in the consultation, we are proposing that the three will all be introduced in the pilot year, but we do invite your thoughts and ideas on whether that should be more of a staggered process, and how we decide on that. What we decide will obviously have implications for the way in which we distribute that funding. So it's a question up in the air at the moment, but really welcome thoughts and ideas on it in the consultation responses.
Okay, great, thank you very much. I wanted to touch on as well on what we mean by innovation in this context. I think this is coming through in the questions. And John, a few people are asking us whether we would be targeting the funding at specific types of innovation or innovations at specific points in their development. Now, we've kept this quite open to date, and I wondered if you wanted to give some thoughts on that.
Yes, thanks, Clotilde. So, I mean, we have, but I do think that we are really sort of looking at something which is quite broad in terms of, the stage of innovation. That means that, we expect there to be sort of new ideas, but also we're also quite keen that we're encouraging rollout of ideas. One of the challenges we definitely see across the sector is lots of pilots, but translating those into operational ideas that get rolled out on networks is more challenging. So we are really keen to see ideas about rollout, so these might be innovations that are more mature, but the challenge is really how do you get them deployed and how do you get them deployed at scale. And I think that's something that we will be wrestling with when we look at the criteria and how we assess that, but I think that's quite an important part of it. I think the other thing that I would say is that, as we said, the focus is on transformational innovation. It's on the things that will really shift the dial for the sector in dealing with long-term challenges, and that is really, where we want to go with this, because we're very keen not to squeeze out existing innovation activity that's going on in the sector, and we're very, very conscious of that. So this is that sort of transformation stuff, and I talked at the beginning of the presentation about some of the kind of areas we're looking at as sort of focus areas in terms of that transformation. I think the only other thing I'd say is that there is a strong emphasis on collaboration here in terms of the types of projects that we're looking to come forward. And though the main competition is really sort of is through the main licensed water companies, we are really keen, and it will be an important criteria for us to be seeing that there has been collaboration, that there are other parties involved in this, and that could be across the supply chain in different sectors, academia, NGOs, all sorts of places. And we're also open to joint funding of this as well. The fund is available there, but others can bring money to the table. We'd be really keen to actually see that there be a multiplier effect. So there's no, we're not trying to not be precious about this.
Great, thank you. So we've also had a few questions around the innovation strategy, which Jonathan, you talked about. So I guess the first question on that is, will Ofwat be approving the innovation strategy formally? And the second question, which is linked, is for those partners out there or those innovators out there with ideas who won't necessarily have direct access to the competition, how do they get access to the competition? How do they communicate their ideas or put forward their proposals to the water company so that it may be considered as part of the innovation competition?
Thanks, Christelle. So in terms of the first of those questions, does Ofwat formally approve the strategy? The answer is no. This is a strategy that is the sector coming together to consider its own innovation architecture and how it sees the priorities and areas of focus that it needs to direct and channel the sector's focus on. Now, we've obviously given our view as to these, where we see the long-term challenges and the themes, but we are not closed to builds on that by any stretch. I think the other thing to probably say is that the audience, or at least the customer for that joint innovation strategy, isn't really Ofwat. It's the sector, it's the supply chain, it's those research bodies, it's the companies, and it is the stakeholders who each have in their different ways a stake in this endeavour. And those are no pushover audiences, and therefore I would see that any challenges that Ofwat might place on the strategy would be more, if not more reinforced by other stakeholders in there. So the bar set by those stakeholders is I would be very surprised is much different. In terms of how can the supply chain get access to the communicate their ideas, I mean, that's really where that infrastructure plays a role. That could be built into proposals around a centre of excellence or an information hub, but also the Innovation in Water Challenge is also a vehicle to get those conversations going in at least in the initial period.
Great. Okay. Thank you very much for that. I'm just noticing we're getting a few questions through in the chat box. That's fine, but we may miss them. So if you could try and pop them into the Slido as well, that would be great. It means that we can have a record of them as well and make sure we answer them. Rachel, I wanted to come back to you on the question of value to customers. So when we look at projects that come through in the competition, how is that value going to be determined? Is it all about costs, or will we be considering other elements in terms of improvement to service, but also enhancement of the environment, for example?
Short answer, cost remains important, of course, but we are looking at the wider benefits of the proposals put forward, including those, I think, as John has mentioned, into the longer term. So it is going back to the themes that we've set out, looking at those broader benefits to the consumer. So short answer, cost is important, but really, really need to set out those wider benefits, both now and in the long term.
Okay, great. Thank you. We've had a few questions as well, or another few comments come through. I guess going back to a previous point we were discussing around ensuring that we get diversity of ideas, that we do get new ideas coming from outside the sector, so not necessarily those that are already acting in the sector. Rachel, is it worth touching on again the Innovation in Water Challenge and then how we're hoping that that will achieve that?
Yes, sorry, I might have missed part of that question, Clotilde, but the Innovation in Water Challenge is really the vehicle for encouraging partnerships between companies, but really bringing in that those new ideas from outside of the sector and across the supply chain. It really is one of the most important parts of this innovation fund, to bring in new ideas into the sector that perhaps, you know, people who've worked in for many, many years haven't had sight of. So we think this is like a really new approach, should help to change and push the dial on the way in which the water sector identifies and finds new solutions to challenges that we all know are out there. But I missed the first part of that question, Clotilde, so please come back if I've not fully answered the question.
No, I think it was just about how we can bring, make sure we bring diversity and new ideas into the sector, and that the competition is designed to enable that. And I guess this links back to the question of the innovation strategy as well, which Jonathan, you mentioned, and there have been some questions from stakeholders around how they can get involved in that. I think it's fair to say that we expect the water companies to put that out to a wider audience soon. Is that right, Jonathan?
That's right. So I'd envisage over the coming weeks that draft strategy would be shared much more widely. And I know that the virtual team that's putting that together are already starting to think about how to, you know, the communications channels and potential events by which that might be best affected.
Okay. We've had a few questions about the pilot year of the innovation competition, which is what we're talking about now. I think a few people would be interested in understanding how we move then from the pilot year to the remaining years. So are we going to have the same model, or are we going to look at the pilot year and learn lessons from that and take a different approach? Are we going to have the same entity supporting us in delivery of this in the pilot year and later on? So Mark, I don't know if you wanted to maybe elaborate on that a little bit.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, I think we're definitely looking at doing a lot of learning from the pilot year, and I think the arrangements that we put in place with the supporting organisation will enable us to reflect quite deeply and heavily on what's happened in the pilot year, and then consider the best approach that we need to make for the years subsequent. And obviously there's a certain amount of setup in the pilot year, and there'll be a certain amount of administration evaluation that we can do, but we won't be able to fully sort of evaluate the impact of some of the early work that we're doing at that point as well. So we're trying to be mindful of not disturbing any progress that is being made on certain projects that are coming through, but certainly we will be reviewing on a fairly ongoing basis the effectiveness of the different strands of the competition. So I think you can expect after the pilot year some news from us on whether or not we're continuing in the same vein, or whether we'll be tweaking and making changes.
Okay, Thank you, Mark. Now we've had some other questions around the kinds of projects funded, and we talked already a little bit about what stage of projects we'd be looking to fund through this. But we've also had a question around whether we'd be looking to fund projects, for example, that look at supporting vulnerable customers. So not necessarily projects that have a technical or technological solution. John, I wondered if you wanted to touch on that.
Thanks, Clotilde. Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I probably should have said up front, but one of the things that's really important in this actually is this isn't just about technology. There can be transformational innovation in terms of processes, in ways of working, of ways of, as supporting vulnerable customers. And these can be things that aren't really about technology at all. They're just about an innovative way of thinking about customers, about how to provide service to them. So I want to be really clear that this isn't just about widgets or bits of kit. I mean, I'm sure there'll be lots of interesting technological solutions that will come to us, and that's great. But it's very important to say that there is a much broader range of innovation, and innovation can come in all forms and shapes and sizes. And I think we are also looking at all the kind of ways of serving different types of customers, and particularly vulnerable customers in the current circumstances where there's been a real focus, and it is really, the current COVID circumstances has created quite a focus on the need to serve those customers who are vulnerable in current circumstances better. So the simple answer is yes. It's a wide range of solutions we're looking for, certainly not just technology focused. Clotilde, back to you.
Hi, sorry, I was just having a slight technical issue here, but I'm back. John, thanks for that. And am I right as well in saying that, regardless of the kind of solution that we're looking to fund, it really is very much about rollout as well. So not just about proof of concepts, and making sure that new solutions are rolled out across the board. Is that correct? Yeah,
absolutely. So yes, that is an extremely important dimension of this. That, as I think we've talked about earlier on the call, the sector there's lots of ideas, there's lots of great, bright people doing great work and thinking about things deeply, but often the deployment of ideas out onto networks at scale is where the challenge comes, and that's something we really want to see proposals coming forward on those side of things. So it doesn't just have to be completely new ideas that no one's ever had before.
Okay. We've had a question come through as well around the question of match funding, which I think, Rachel, you referred to, or Jonathan, you referred to in the presentation as risk sharing and making sure that shareholders and customers share risk appropriately. Jonathan, do you want to maybe outline our proposals and our thinking on this a little bit more?
Yes, I mean, I think that there's a while the innovation strategy will address the collaboration architecture, nothing concentrates the mind as much as having skin in the game. And so I guess in one of the policy areas that we've outlined is this idea of risk sharing, and I guess within a different term for that would be sort of co-funding or match funding. Where we've suggested that as a minimum we would envisage 10% of the company's funds in conjunction with funding streams from the innovation fund. So in a sense that there is a sort of a financial coalition, which I think will help ensure that the opportunities are kind of seized, and that there is the support that comes from within the companies to help make sure these projects progress and land as best they can.
Yeah. Thanks, Jonathan. And I think that this whole idea of match funding and making sure risks are shared appropriately also links back to the question of IPR, which we mentioned. I think there are a few concerns coming through in some of the questions and comments that without the right IPR arrangements, we might not see we might not be incentivizing new innovators to come forward through the innovation competition. So Jonathan or Rachel, I don't know if you want to maybe explain what our role is in this, I guess, and how we're trying to balance protecting customers with incentivizing new ideas to come forward.
I can say a few words, and then Jonathan, perhaps if you have anything to add, you can come in. But really, IPR is something to be managed commercially. Our interest comes in ensuring that any IPRs are delivering benefits for consumers and for water customers, but essentially it's a contractual issue, the IPR. Jonathan, do you have anything to add, or Clotilde?
Yeah, sure. There's a section. It's one of the things that we've probably sort of talked about. It's on page sort of 9 of the consultation, where we introduced this notion of background and foreground IPR. It's probably worth stakeholders taking a look at that. I mean, what we're envisaging here is these would be the default arrangements for IPR, such that the pre-existing IPR that people would bring to innovation, that they would retain that, but IPR that was created through customers' funding that was enabled by the fund, so IPR that comes out of that customer-funded innovation, that the default would that would be available through license to the sector. But this is obviously a sensitive issue, and we are trying to balance up making that collaboration happen with protecting the legitimate concerns of potential supply chain collaborators, but also recognizing that this is customers' money which is being injected into these opportunities, and that therefore some of that kind of leans us towards ensuring that is made available more widely.
Thanks, Jonathan. So I'm just conscious of time. We've had a couple of questions around the one-stop shop, which I guess we can maybe finish on. Mark, would you be able to give a bit more detail as to how the one-stop shop will work potentially? And also, a couple of people are interested in understanding whether the body or organisation supporting us in administering the competition will also be involved in the one-stop shop.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you. So just to clear that point up, first, we are expecting to provide the one-stop shop ourselves, at least initially, and that's certainly the plan at the moment. And we're looking and considering internally what our offer in respect to the one-stop shop might be. I think we're definitely edging towards a sort of an incremental, slow build as to what it can offer. So certainly an advice function to begin with, potentially, to help innovators sort of navigate the world of regulation a little bit better, particularly those who aren't as familiar with it. So very much a sort of a response and guidance service we're anticipating to begin with, and then we're going to look at our options from there and consider whether or not that there's any room for expansion into potentially sort of sandboxing, introducing that as an element, and then beyond that, opportunity scanning, horizon scanning, that sort of stuff. So we're at the early stages of considering what exactly we want this to look like at the moment. We definitely want to sort of own this ourselves, but given all the other work that we're trying to sort of introduce at the same time, we definitely think a sort of slow incremental build to introducing this and sort of doing it well at various sort of basic stages to begin with is the way to do it.
Okay, great. All right, thank you very much, Mark. Just a couple of points have come up as well around parallels with various Ofgem mechanisms, and I think it's fair to say we are working very closely with our colleagues at Ofgem to make sure we learn the lessons from that, and we're also thinking about how our experience in the water sector and challenges we face maybe differ, and therefore it needs some slightly different solutions, but definitely something that we are looking at. So 1 minute to 11, so I think it's just time to close. Before I hand over to Jonathan for a few last words, I just wanted to say we will make everything available as soon as possible. If you want to keep sending in questions over the next hour or so, or answer the polls for another hour or so, I'll leave that online for you. Jonathan, do you want to close us off?
Yeah, just to say thank you again for joining today. Both the poll and the questions that you've raised give us a real helpful and early view of the what's front of your minds. There are a number of people who submitted questions without sort of identifying themselves, which is absolutely fine. However, would encourage you to if there are points that you particularly want to land and connect back with to yourselves, then I would encourage you to submit that into the consultation, which closes on the 24th. But thank you very much for your time, and thanks for doing this. And as ever, we welcome feedback on how the event worked for you, and what we can do to make it better as we end up doing more of these in virtual circumstances over the coming months. Thank you very much for your time. Goodbye.